justice. If you ask any Muslim what the core attribute of God is, they will say al-adl, the just. We are told this book is a mizan, a balance. It is supposed to be the source of perfect equity, but there is a crack in that foundation, a crack that has existed for 1400 years. It is a crack that has allowed millions of families to be broken. It has allowed men to justify secret lives. And it has silently told half the human population, women, that God somehow favors the other half. I'm talking about the polygamy verse, Surah An-Nisa, verse 3. You know the translation. You've heard it from the pulpit. You've heard it from your uncles. If you fear you cannot be just to orphans, marry women of your choice, 2 or 3 or 4. For centuries, this single sentence has been the ultimate trump card for men. It defines Islamic family law. It defines how the West sees Islam, and it defines the hidden pain in millions of Muslim homes. But today, I am going to ask you to do something dangerous. I'm going to ask you to set aside the Tafseer, set aside the Hadith, set aside what the ulama told you, because I am going to make a claim that will make the establishment very uncomfortable. I am going to prove to you that Surah 4, Ayah 3 does not allow polygamy. In fact, I am going to prove, using the Quran alone, its root words, its math, and its strict grammar, that this ayah was never about men collecting wives. It was a command to the community to empty the orphanages. It is not a permission for sexual variety. It is a mandate for social welfare. And by the end of this video, you won't just believe me, you will see it in the text yourself. If you are ready to unlearn about 1400 years of cultural baggage, let's get to work. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. A'udhu billahi an nakuna minal jahilin. Salamun alaikum. Before we look at the Arabic, we have to look at the reality. Why is this traditional translation defended so fiercely? Because it grants power. When you twist a verse to serve desire, you create an industry of exploitation. Look at what has happened to our communities because of this interpretation. The Sunni myth. In the Sunni world, scholars invented loopholes like nikah misyar, the traveler's marriage, or secret marriage. We see wealthy men using Surah 4:3 as a God-given right to marry a second wife in secret, often a vulnerable woman, a refugee, or someone poor. He marries her for access. He hides her from his first family. He lies to his children. And when he gets caught, he points to the Quran and says, God allowed me 2, 3, and 4. He uses the book of justice to justify betrayal. The Shia myth. In the Shia world, the abuse is even more institutionalized with nikah muta, temporary marriage, renting a woman for an hour, a day, or a week. Again, they hide behind the rights they claim are in Surah An-Nisa. I ask you, does a God of justice send a revelation to turn women into commodities? Is destroying the trust in a home a sunnah? Or is this just patriarchy wearing a religious mask? We have to stop pretending this is harmless. This interpretation is spiritual abuse. Now the critics will say, but brother, Surah An-Nisa is about women. It's about marriage rules. Is it? This is where we have to stop reading snippets and start reading the whole book. I want to show you something that most people never notice. I want to show you the architecture of Surah 4. If you scan this surah from verse 1 to verse 176, you realize something shocking. This is not a book of romance. It is not a domestic diary. Surah 4 is a civil and military constitution. Let me prove it to you. Look at the structure. Verses 2 to 14, it opens with property law, managing orphan wealth, detailed inheritance mathematics, 1/2, 1/4, 1/8. It's an economic charter. Verses 15 to 25, it moves to criminal law, public indecency, incest taboos, prohibited contracts. Verses 58 to 70, it establishes judicial law, render trusts to their owners, judge with justice. Verses 71 to 104, it shifts to military law, rules of engagement, how to fight for the oppressed, mustadafin. And look at how specific it gets. Traditionalists think verses 43 and 101 are about ritual prayers and washing. But when you look at the roots, you see military protocol. Verse 43, often called the don't pray drunk verse, but the root sukara means mentally confused, intoxicated. The root junub means sidelined or unprepared. God is saying, do not approach the mission, assembly, salat, while you are mentally compromised or operationally unprepared. This is a standing order for duty. Verses 101 and 102, the so-called fear prayer. It describes dividing the army into two groups. Group A holds weapons, while Group B rests, submits, sajadu. Then they swap. This isn't a yoga class on a battlefield. This is tactical shift management. Verse 176. The surah ends exactly how it began, with inheritance math. Do you see the picture? Economic law, criminal law, judicial law, military tactics, inheritance math. This is a constitution for a nation in crisis. Does it make any sense that in the middle of this high-level constitution, between managing millions in orphan wealth and organizing military guard shifts, God would suddenly pause to say, oh, by the way, men, go have fun with 4 wives if you want? No, it doesn't fit. It breaks the coherence of the book. Whatever verse 3 means, it must fit into the theme of crisis management and social welfare. And that is exactly what we are going to find. So let's look at verse 3. The traditional translation commits a logical suicide that most people are too afraid to point out. The verse is a conditional statement, an if-then sentence. The condition, the problem. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي يَتَامَى. If you fear you will not be just to the orphans, al-yatama, the traditional solution. فَأَنْكِهُ مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ. Then marry women of your choice. Think about this. I am the guardian of an orphan. I am holding his money. I am afraid I might mistreat him or steal his funds, which is the context of the previous verse, 4:2. How? Tell me how does going out and marrying a stranger, a completely unrelated woman, fix the orphan's problem? Does bringing a second wife into my house protect the orphan's money? No, it drains it. Does it ensure I give the orphan attention? No. Now I have a new wife demanding attention. The solution does not fit the problem. In fact, the traditional scholars knew this. That's why in the Tafseer books, they invented stories. They said, oh, it means if you like the orphan girl but won't pay her dowry, don't marry her, go marry someone else. Do you see what they did? They had to insert the words orphan girl and dowry into the text to make it make sense. But the text doesn't say orphan girl. It says al-yatama, the general term for solitary, vulnerable children. If your translation requires you to add words that God didn't put there just to make the logic work, then your translation is wrong. God is not incoherent. Our understanding is. So let's fix it. Let's go to the root words. To fix the logic, we have to fix the definitions. We have to go back to the source code, the classical Arabic roots. Let's perform surgery on these words. Word 1, the action Ankihu. The command is Ankihu, traditionally translated as marry. The root is nun kaf ha. Go deep into the lexicon. Yes, it is used for a marriage contract, but the core root meaning is to tie, to knot, to mingle, to absorb, to contract. Context is everything. We are in a surah that is a civil constitution talking about managing orphan property, verse 2. In this context, Ankihu doesn't just mean a romantic union. It means integration. It means take these vulnerable people and tie their livelihood to yours. Merge their household into your household. It is a fiduciary contract of care. The object, An-Nisa. This is the hardest part for people to accept, because we have been programmed for centuries. We are told An-Nisa means women, period. But let's look at the root, Nun Sin Hamza. Look it up in Lisan al-Arab or any classical dictionary. The verb nasa'a means to delay, to postpone, to defer, to be left behind. It is the opposite of priority or leading. Why are adult females traditionally called nisa in Arabic? Because historically, sociologically, they were the ones who walked behind the men, or were delayed in status and power. The word describes a social status of dependency or being held back. The breakthrough. Now look at the verse. God is linking yatama, orphans, the solitary ones, with nisa, the delayed ones. In this specific legal context of crisis, nisa refers to the delayed class, the vulnerable wards. Who are they? They are the widows struggling to raise those orphans. They are the elderly guardians. They are the refugees who have been left behind by society. The verse isn't saying, marry hot women. It is saying, if you fear for the orphans, then integrate Ankihu, the vulnerable wards, Nisa, who are attached to them. Take the whole unit. Don't separate the mother from the child. Absorb the whole struggling family. I know what you're thinking. You're just making this up. Nisa means women. Okay, don't believe me? Let's ask God. Let's look later in the same surah, verse 127, where God explicitly defines what he is talking about. Look at this phrase, Yatama and Nisa. The traditional translators panic here. If you look at Yusuf Ali or Sahih International, they translate this as orphan girls. I want you to look closely at the Arabic. Does it say banat, girls? No. Does it say inath, females? No. The word girls is not there. They added it. The text simply says Yatama and Nisa, which grammatically means the orphans of the Nisa, or the Nisa orphans. The logic check. If Nisa just means adult women, then the phrase means orphan adult women. In Islamic law, once you are an adult, you are rarely legally classified as an orphan needing guardianship. It doesn't make sense. But if we use our root definition, Nisa equals the vulnerable delayed class, then the phrase becomes the orphans of the vulnerable class. It fits perfectly. Verse 4:127 is the smoking gun. It proves that in the context of this surah's legislation, the term Nisa is intrinsically linked to vulnerability and orphanhood, not just gender. If the linguistics didn't convince you, the math will. This is undeniable. The traditional translation says, marry 2 or 3 or 4. It sounds like a menu option for men. But look at the Arabic grammar. God does not use the cardinal numbers, ithnain, 2, thalatha, 3, arba, 4. God uses distributive adjectives, mathna, by twos or in groups of 2, thalatha, by threes or in groups of 3, ruba, by 4s or in groups of 4. And look at the connector word between them. It is not al, or. It is wa, and. So literally translated, the verse says, integrate the wards by 2s and by 3s and by 4s. Think about it. If a general is facing a refugee crisis and yells to the town, take these people in, 2 by 2 and 3 by 3 and 4 by 4. Is he telling one man to go out and become a group of 9 people? No. He is speaking to the collective community. the plural you in the verse. He is saying, we have a crisis. Distribute the burden. Some households take a group of 2 wards. Larger households take a group of 3. Wealthy households take a group of 4. This is not a permission slip for lust. This is crowd control. This is a divine mandate for social welfare distribution. It's about emptying the refugee camps, not filling a man's bedroom. And finally, look at the failsafe. The verse ends, but if you fear you will not be just to a group, then wahidatan, only one. If you cannot handle the financial or emotional burden of integrating a group of 4 vulnerable people, or 3, or even 2, then take just 1 ward. Do not overburden yourself to the point where you become unjust to them. This proves that the numbers 2, 3, and 4 were a burden of responsibility, not a limit on pleasure. God is asking us to maximize our charity, but only up to the limit of justice. Now, the skeptics have one last argument. They will say, but wait, verse 4:129 says you will never be able to be just between Nisa, women. If Nisa means wards, does the verse still make sense? It makes perfect sense. In fact, it makes more sense. Let's apply our definition. If An-Nisa in 4:3 means the delayed wards, the groups of vulnerable people, then An-Nisa in 4:129 also means the delayed wards. Read 4:129 with this lens. You will never be able to deal with perfect equality between the delayed wards, An-Nisa, even if it is your ardent desire. Think about the reality of social work. If you follow the command of verse 3 and take in multiple groups of refugees or orphans, can you treat them all exactly the same? One group might be sick and need more money. One group might be difficult and need more time. Another might be easy. You will naturally have favorites or give more attention to the urgent cases. Look at how the verse ends. So do not incline completely toward one and leave the other suspended. Kal mu'alaka. The word is mu'alaka. It means hanging or suspended in limbo. This is not romantic language. This is bureaucratic language. God is giving you a management reality check. He's saying, look, when you distribute these wards into your homes, as per verse 3, you won't be perfect. You will have biases. That is human. But do not neglect the difficult groups so much that they feel suspended, like they have no guardian at all. The conclusion, verse 4:3 is the mandate. Distribute the wards. Verse 4:129 is the manual. Don't let any group fall through the cracks. Both verses are about social care. So we have to ask the hard question. Does the Quran allow polygamy? If Surah 4:3 is the only verse in the entire book that people use to justify it, and we just proved mathematically and linguistically that this verse is about orphan care distribution, then the permission slip disappears. There is no other verse in the Quran that says, marry multiple women. None. In fact, the Quran warns us in 4:129 that justice in such arrangements is impossible. And since God commands justice, adl, God is effectively closing the door on any institution that makes justice impossible. Polygamy was a cultural carryover from the pre-Islamic world. It wasn't invented by the Quran. But in Surah 4, the Quran was trying to pivot the society. It was trying to turn men from collectors of women into guardians of the weak. The traditionalists have dragged us backward. They took a verse meant to solve a humanitarian crisis and turned it into a tool for male privilege. That ends today. Now that we have the roots, the math, and the context, let us hear what God is actually saying to us in Surah An-Nisa, verse 3. The context, you are a community facing a crisis of orphans, yatama, and vulnerable people, Nisa. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى. And if you fear that you will not be able to deal equitably with the solitary orphans, al-yatama, فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ. Then integrate, contract, Ankihu, with those who seem wholesome to you from among the delayed wards. An-Nisa, the vulnerable families attached to them. Mathna wa thulatha wa ruba'a. Distribute them into your homes in groups of 2 and groups of 3 and groups of 4. فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدَةً. But if you fear that you will not be just to a group, then take only one ward, unit. أَوْ مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ ذَلِكَ أَدْنَىٰ أَلَّا تَعُولُوا. Or those strictly under your contract. That is mirror to prevent you from doing injustice. Do you see the difference? The traditional view says, men, go satisfy your desires. The Quranic view says, society, step up and share the burden of the weak. One is a privilege for men. The other is a duty for mankind. To the men who have used this verse to justify secret marriages or to make their wives feel replaceable, the game is up. We can read, we can count, and we know what the book actually says. Stop using God's name to justify your ego. And to the women who have felt that this verse made them lesser, you were right to feel that pain, because that pain was your soul rejecting a lie. God is just. He did not create you to be a fraction of a household. He created this law to protect the vulnerable, not to exploit the faithful. This is the Quran. It is a civil constitution of justice. It is time we stop reading it through the eyes of ancient emperors and start reading it through the eyes of the orphans it came to save. Check the roots, check the math, and free the truth. Wassalamun alaikum.